guarantees that he or she will find it both true and personal. A copywriter I spoke to told me he loved using this particular gambit to get the reader emotionally involved. We think they know, by speaking of somebody in general terms, so that the person has to fill in the blanks herself. You can also give an impression of knowing more about him or her than you actually do. A good example of this is the interrogation method, which was used in China during the 1950s. When somebody was arrested, she was basically told only that we know it all. You may as well confess. Then the poor prisoner was simply left in her cell for a few days to try to figure out what they actually meant. At last, after enough thinking, everybody always came up with something they'd done that they felt had to be the crime they were suspected of. The problem was that each confession was met with the statement that even if what she had confessed to was a serious crime, it wasn't the crime she was suspected of. Back to the cell, or back to some more creative interrogation methods, until the poor victim had confessed every act in her entire life as a potential crime towards the government. This method can also be used to win people's trust. Express yourself about something in personal terms, but be ambiguous enough that the listener has to fill in all of the blanks herself. While you're reading this, make a tight fist with one of your hands. Done it yet? Good, keep it like that for a few seconds, a few more. Now, begin to open your hand, very slowly. Right about now, you should have a rather odd sensation in your hand, right? Good. To be completely honest, I have no idea how your hand felt. It might have felt tingly, or itchy, or sweaty, or you may have felt that your hand was unusually warm, or it could have been something else entirely. I left out enough information and expressed myself with enough ambiguity, a rather odd sensation in your hand, to make you fill in all the blanks of what I actually meant by it. And you did, by assuming that what I was referring to was whatever specific sensation you had in your hand, a sensation that I didn't actually have any knowledge of. This way, you can make it seem like you know everything about somebody, even his most intimate secrets, by making him define for himself the things you're talking about. This technique is used by religious leaders, in police interrogations, and by unscrupulous confidence tricksters. Public outrages and other generalizations. Another way of using suggestion by implication is by using generalizations. A generalization is a statement that claims that everything in a certain category shares a certain trait. If you say that all Scots are misers, you've made a broad generalization about everybody who lives in Scotland. Words that are commonly used in generalizations include all, none, always, all the time, never, everywhere, and so on. Note that even seemingly specific words like immigrants or kids are actually broad generalizations. By using these words, you erase any obvious or subtle differences that are actually there, and GA a very simplified account of things. We often use generalizations in our speech in everyday situations. There is also a certain type of generalization that you come across in the news, like in our Swedish evening papers, which are full of phrases like "in the face of growing criticism," "in a telephone poll," or, my personal favorite, "public outrage." But what do they really mean? How much does criticism need to be growing for it to be acceptable to claim that it is growing? Because honestly, for it to be true, strictly speaking, no more would actually be required than for an angry email to show up on Monday, and then another one on Tuesday. How many people do you need to call to make it a telephone poll? 200? 20? 2? You might think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. A journalist once told me that his newspaper demanded that there be 3 or 4 upset people in order to use the phrase public outrage in an article. I can't vouch for the truth of this, but it doesn't sound too far-fetched, especially when you consider that when propaganda expert Martin Borgs worked at a newspaper, its definition of an outrage meant 10 angry letters from its readers. So what's the problem with this, then? Well, by using these kinds of words, we make it sound as though there is a consensus out there, when this could actually be untrue. We don't react consciously to these words. In fact, we almost don't even hear them, but they still leave us with a feeling that this is something people seem to have a certain opinion about. Maybe even most people, seeing as it's an outrage and everything. In this way, you can create a public opinion out of nothing. We don't want people to think we're stupid, so to play it safe, we tend to think the same as everybody else does. And if it's true, as the paper says, that something is facing growing criticism, maybe I should consider taking a stand against that thing the people seem so upset about, right? This is a good way of influencing public opinion and making people think what you want them to, by using generalizations that imply that most people are already feeling this way, when there's actually only a handful, perhaps no more than 10 people involved. Watch out for abstractions. The last method for hiding suggestions and implications is a variation of the vacuous rhetoric I mentioned in the section on lying. By expressing yourself in an extremely specific way, but simultaneously avoiding defining the words and terms you use, you can make it sound like you're supporting or even proving a claim, without actually having provided any real information at all. An example of this is the business manager under pressure who said, "The first thing we need to do is discuss this new, difficult situation we're in, as it affects important elements in our continuous process of growth." Sounds good enough, I guess, but he never told everybody what that situation was, or why it was so difficult. and I doubt anybody really felt particularly illuminated. Besides, what are those supposedly important elements he was talking about? What process, and how long has it been going on for? Anyway, journalists are familiar with this trick of using excessive abstraction, and if they're any good, they have very little patience for this kind of thing. Media teachers will often warn their clients that they can only get away with 3 consecutive uses of excessive abstraction before losing credibility. The hard part is to discover it at all as a listener. It sounds good, often very good, even, but in writing, it will often look absurd. You ray one big suggestion. In fact, it's not just your words that suggest things to others. Your entire presence, what you're wearing, how you move, and how you sound are all important, too. The whole idea of leading somebody into rapport can be considered giving of suggestions that the other person follows. Martin Borges, in his book Propaganda, gives an example of how he used his own body for suggestion to influence a decision when he wanted to be discharged from the look deep, NTO my eyes. 193. Hospital a day Kali. The problem was that this was a Sunday, when nobody is usually discharged. The first step was to ask the nurse to tell the doctor I wanted to see him. Before the doctor arrived, I freshened myself up, took off the huge hospital shirt, took a shower, put sawn jeans and a sweater on, tidied the room, and put everything in its right place, packed my stuff in bags, and left them in a visible spat on the floor. Then, I sat down in the chair to type on my computer, instead of lying in bed watching TV. The unstated implication couldn't have been clearer. The doctor wasn't meeting a weak man, but a healthy man with good, strong energy levels. Martin was discharged the very same day. Think about your body language, the way you speak, your clothes, and the way you act. What suggestions are you giving people about yourself? And what suggestions would you like to be giving them? The methods of influence this chapter has touched on have mainly been methods for influencing the opinions of others, but people's emotions can be influenced, too. The next chapter will teach you how to use anchors, which allow you to activate the desired emotions in yourself and in others, with speed and great precision. Remember the things you've already learned about how our actions are controlled by our emotions, and you'll realize the power this kind of influence has. But remember, you have to give up all your ambitions of world domination and planting Manchurian candidates before I'll allow you to read on.
10. Paul anchors how to plant and trigger emotional states, in which you will get in touch with your own feelings and those of others, dodge a hug, and lose your fear of sharks. As you know, you can influence the emotional states of others by means of rapport and suggestion. However, the results will often be a little imprecise. E.g. How do you lead someone toward excited and confident as opposed to happy and creative? And you might have a hard time achieving strong emotional reactions. There is a more effective way of influencing emotions, which allows you to trigger any commotion you like in anybody you like whenever you like. And this more effective way is the use of anchors. Anchors equals imprints. There's actually no real difference between an anchor and an imprint, which is what Pavlov was making when he got his dogs to produce saliva when he rang a bell. The difference is that we're imprinting people, not dogs, and the things we're imprinting are emotional states, not drooling. This means that you can quickly turn other people's negative emotional states into positive ones using anchors. Since any emotion can be anchored, you will be able to produce emotions like an inclination to buy something, to worship, or to exhibit nervous tension. So don't forget what Spider-Man's Uncle Ben told you. Use your new knowledge responsibly, and only use your powers for good. There are plenty of people who have tried going down the other path, and they'll tell you that whatever goes around comes around. And besides, if you exploit people in this life, you'll spend your next life as a rock. So be good. It's better to give the people you meet something special to remember than to help them get even more neurotic. You're already full of anchors. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, nothing in this book is really news to you. This is true of anchors as well. You use them all the time already. We have lots of experiences as we go through our lives. Many of these experiences will also be tied to strong emotional states like joy, love, hate, betrayal, happiness, nervous tension, anger, and so on. When we're reminded of something we've experienced, we remember more than just the event. To some extent, we also start to feel the same as we did at the time. We don't actually even need to remember the event. We can bring back the emotions from events we've even forgotten. That's why we can see somebody from afar and instinctively feel dislike for her. It's not until afterward that we realize she resembles somebody who used to bully us at school, or that she was wearing the same type of sweater our childhood enemy used to wear. The thing that triggers one of these emotional reactions to a memory, in this case a certain look or item of clothing, is known as an anchor. It's a situation, object, or experience that we unconsciously associate with a certain emotion. Its appearance, like the sweater, plays some role in the specific memory with which the emotion is associated. Makes sense? We come across anchors all the time, like when we hear a song we know and have the same emotions we did when we heard it the first time. Hey, they're playing our Songal Devo, remember? Or like going through albums full of old photos, awakening memories and the emotions that go with them. And let's not forget movie soundtracks. In many films, the music is used as an anchor to get the audience into the right emotional state. Two of the best examples of this are Fritz Lang's M and Steven Spielberg's Jaws. In M, the killer whistled in the Hall of the Mountain King by Grieg every time he appeared. In the end, just hearing the whistling was enough to make the audience understand that the killer was approaching, without him having to appear on screen. This trick may have given people the shivers in 1931, but audiences are a little more sophisticated these days, right? 44 years later, Spielberg used the famous theme from Jaws in exactly the same way Lang did, to indicate that the shark was approaching. I know several people who saw Jaws when they were around the age of 12, who still experience a significantly elevated pulse, sweating, anxiety, and nervous twitches every time I sneak up behind them to hum, dum dum, dum dum duhm dum dum do me. How's that for an anchor? Places can make for strong anchors. A friend of mine figured this out on her own recently when she broke up with her boyfriend. The conversation between the two of them began to embed at her place, but when the tears and anger came out, she quickly realized they had to finish the conversation in the kitchen instead. As she explained it to me, otherwise all of those horrible, sad emotions would have stayed there in my bed. They would have come back every time I went to bed to go to sleep, and of course I didn't want that. Fortunately, she realized her bed was turning into a powerful negative anchor before it was too late, but as luck would have it, we're not always this perceptive. The strongest anchors are often the sensory impressions that we give the least thought to, tastes and smells. One of the most famous examples of an anchor in human culture is the one described by author Marcel Proust in his novel In Search of Lost Time, wherein the main character eats a little cake he has just dunked in his cup of tea and suddenly remembers his entire childhood, and suddenly the memory returns. The taste was that of the little crumb of Madeleine which on Sunday mornings at Cambrai, when I went to say good day to her in her bedroom, my Aunt Leonie used to give me, dipping it first in her own cup of real or of limeflower tea. But when from a long distant past nothing subsists, after the people are dead, after the things are broken and scattered, still, alone, the smell and taste of things remain. And once I had recognized the taste of the crumb of Madeleine soaked in her decoction of limeflowers which my aunt used to give me, immediately the old grey house upon the street, where her room was, rose up like the scenery of a theater, and the whole of Cambrai and of its surroundings, taking their proper shapes and growing solid, sprang into being, town and gardens alike, from my cup of tea. Anchors on cue. The anchors we are interested in here are not of the kind Proust was talking about. The kind we are dealing with are anchors that can provoke different emotional states in people. Of course, it would be very useful if we could know exactly which anchors lie hidden in the unconscious minds of ourselves and others, so we could trigger them at will. Feeling a little drained? Trigger your energy anchor, and boomy-eye just like that, you've turned yourself into the Energizer Bunny. In this way, we could influence ourselves and others to always feel as happy as possible, and to always be in a creative, exciting state of mind. But since the anchors are hidden in the unconscious mind, it's very hard to know what they are. This might make it sound like it's time to give up, but that would be premature. You see, we can easily create new anchors, in our schools as well as in others, and we're always doing it anyway, so we might as well learn to do it effectively. By creating new anchors, you will always know exactly which emotion is being triggered and exactly what to do to trigger it. Here's how it works. Whatever you do or say when you're with somebody who is experiencing a strong emotion will become linked to the emotion in the other person's memories. That particular action will be your anchor. At a later time, when you repeat it, saying or doing the same thing as before, this will stimulate the memory of the emotional state that person was in when the anchor was planted. How much of the emotion is reawakened, and whether the emotion is as powerful as before or just a pale shadow of a memory, depends on how well you manage to plant the anchor in the first place. By making yourself aware of how anchors are made, you will also get a better sense of the anchors you plant in people unintentionally. The same goes for anchors you plant in yourself.
One my friend almost
like
planted in her bedroom. And, of course, you'll also have a better chance of noticing what anchors other people plant in you, intentionally or otherwise. Anchors, like suggestions, are often used in the wrong way. Unconscious and negative anchors, Jerry Richardson, mentioned earlier, gives a good example, in which a father notices that his son is sad, and hugs him. The father's intentions, of course, is to give comfort and support. The problem is that his hug has to have been used in a positive context before, that is, been anchored with positive emotions, for the positive emotions to be triggered when he hugs his sad little boy. But this father doesn't have a lot of physical contact with his children. In fact, it only really happens when he needs to comfort them. So instead of this hug being associated with something pleasant, and the father being able to use it to counteract the negatives, his hug will be anchored with a negative emotional state, since that's when the child experiences it. If this happens a few times in a row, every time the father hugs his son, he will be putting him in a negative state, even if the son was happy to begin with. If physical touch is used only when somebody is sad, that emotion will be associated with the touch, whatever the intentions behind it are. Unfortunately, we tend to touch people more when they are sad or upset. Richardson wonders if this might explain why so many people in our society don't like being touched. They've simply learned, since the childhood, to associate touch with negative emotions. This is a frightening thought. We need to become more aware of our behavior, since the memory of how somebody behaved will be stored in our unconscious mind, along with the memory of the emotion we experienced at the time. Generally speaking, it's a good idea to make physical contact with somebody who's in a good mood. In this way, you can help him when he feels less happy, by touching him and triggering his current, positive emotions. Of course, an emotional anchor doesn't have to involve any touching. I use touching in the example because physical contact is a common way of giving comfort and support, and because anchors using touch tend to be very strong. But as I wrote previously, anything we can perceive can make a functional anchor: a word, an image, a tone of voice, a particular gesture, a smell, a color, or a taste. Combining various sensory impressions in an anchor is even better. Instead of just saying a word, you do it with a specific tone of voice while making a gesture with one hand and touching her arm with the other hand. The more sensory impressions you can include in the anchor, the clearer and stronger it will be. Altering other people's mental states. You know that the mood you're in, and whatever is going through your head at the moment, has a great effect on how you perceive the things you're told, and whether you'll find a particular idea wonderful, or terrible. If you have an idea or a proposition you'd like somebody to listen to, and preferably agree to, you need her to be in as receptive an emotional state as possible. If she isn't, and you don't have the tools to alter her emotional state, you could end up in trouble. Establishing rapport is the most important tool for this, but even if you get her to like you and want to be open to your ideas, she might still be sad or upset about something you can't do anything about. It could be something that has nothing to do with your relationship to her, maybe something to do with her private affairs. Even though her intentions are good, the emotions she's carrying around will still affect her attitude to your idea, even if the reason for her state has nothing to do with you. By using a positive anchor, you can alter her emotional state to make it more suitable for your meeting, at least temporarily. You can also use an anchor to strengthen somebody's emotional response to a certain suggestion, like the car salesman who asks his customer, "How do you feel about making a deal right away?" and then simultaneously triggers an anchor to make his customer experience strong feelings of joy. Anchors work because of the way we associate things that happen inside our minds, how we feel or what we're thinking, to events in the world outside us. It doesn't matter if the two are directly connected or not. This is how anchors are created, but it's also one of the reasons why knowing how to use them is so important. If you meet somebody who is in a negative state, and you don't know how to get him out of it, you run the risk of having your entire meeting become an anchor for his negative emotional stat. Then, every time he meets you or hears of you, he will feel slightly uncomfortable or unhappy, and he won't understand why. That's not quite the feeling you want other people to have for you, is it? It can actually have a devastating effect, both on your private life and on your career. Fortunately, the opposite is true as well. If you're good at awakening positive, great emotions in other people, by using the skills you've learned from this book, you will make yourself into an anchor for these emotions. If the anchor is strong enough, all that will be required to trigger these positive emotions, or whatever the emotions you've planted are, is for somebody to mention you by name. As I said earlier, you can plant anchors in yourself, too. This is a good way to give yourself a well-needed boost of any emotion you need. You could make yourself confident before a situation that would otherwise make you nervous, happy when you're down, or energetic and determined when you're feeling lazy, and so on. You can also combine several different emotions into a single anchor. I have an anchor for myself that triggers a mixed emotion with elements of joy, pride, curiosity, some butterflies in the stomach, and a healthy dose of self-confidence. The effect is almost intoxicating. I trigger it every time I'm about to go on stage to perform one of my shows, and it gets me into the exact right frame of mind to allow me to give the performance my absolute best. Now, I want to teach you how to make your own anchors. I suggest you don't just read this, try it out for yourself at once. That's the only way to make yourself understand how simple it actually is and how well it works. It may sound like magic, but it's really no more mystical than the effect on Pavlov's pooches. The fact is, it's the exact same thing, just more fun and a lot quicker. It's that human touch. How to plant an anchor. Exactly what you should do: gesture, word, touch, or something else, depends on what you'd like to use and what the situation allows for. As I wrote earlier, touch is a strong anchor for most people, but some situations don't allow for any touch beyond the initial handshake. Perhaps you're simply too far from the other person to be able to touch him or her in a natural way. In situations like this, you should get good results if you use a clear, accentuated gesture and say something. The gesture should be something you don't normally do, like clapping your hands, a quick drumroll using your fingers, slapping your forehead, or a very distinctive facial expression. What makes using a word so useful is that you can hide the word in your spec when you want to trigger the anchor. In fact, the word you use to trigger the anchor doesn't even have to be the same word that you use to plant the anchor, as long as it sounds very similar and you intonate it the same way. An example of how words can be used along with body language to make an anchor. To establish the anchor, you make a specific gesture or touch while saying, at the golf course, for example, what a great swing, emphasize the word great. To trigger the anchor at a later time, such as in a meeting, you make the same gesture or touch, while saying, I'm convinced this will be a great solution for you. How do you feel about it? Intonate great the same way you did when you planted the anchor. An example of the use of similar words, planting the anchor, good job, triggering the anchor, we should go. In both cases, good/should are intonated the same way and spoken at the same moment as any gesture or touch you're using. Do you remember the car salesman? What he does, by saying something like, I'm sure this will be a good solution for you. How do you feel about it? Or a more direct version, let's make a deal good. While tapping you lightly on your shoulder, is to make you feel something similar to the feeling you got when Kay planted the word good along with a tap to the shoulder. He did this while telling you an amusing anecdote, and you never noticed a thing. Now that you're back in that emotional state again, you have.